Limbus company is home to many teams, all with different playstyles, goals, mechanics, win conditions and more. The strongest teams often follow complex guidelines, where no single identity can step out of line if you want the perfect clear. But what if you wanted to streamline it? What if you wanted to make strength simple? Well, then you'd get one very specific team. A composition that, surprisingly, was widely requested to be covered. You guys have been asking and begging and crying and threatening me to make this video, and I think it's time I stopped trolling y'all. That's right, it's finally time for us to talk about Envy Resonance, and the rise of the Middle Syndicate to power within Limbus Company's Season 7. See, I usually make videos covering the new content added in Limbus Company, but curiously, I left out a lot of Envy Resonance content in the past couple of months. Do you really think it was a coincidence? Well, yeah, it was. But today, we get to make the most out of this situation, as in this video I want to go over Ricardo Heathcliff, Matthias Outis, and every interesting detail of the newly available full Middle Envy Resonance. You can consider this a hybrid review of multiple things at once. And don't you worry, we're not going to need any kit reviews today. Instead, we'll jump into the deep end instantly. Before we do that, however, allow me to remind you that most of my viewers are not subscribed, so if you find yourself coming back to my videos, or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just 1 second and helps me out a lot. Now let's get into the middle. Ricardo Heathcliff and Matthias Outis, the two units that made Envy Resonance relevant. What exactly made the two of them a breaking point? As a baseline, they both interact with the usual middle gimmick. What is that gimmick, you ask? Well, I expect most of you to know by now, but I guess going over it won't hurt. The team is called Envy Resonance. That is because it needs to chain 6 Envy Resonance to give its middle identities their biggest strength. When a middle identity uses a counter with 6 Envy Absolute Resonance present on the board, the counter changes into a skill 3, increasing the damage of the unit's rotation many times over. That's it. The gimmick is pretty simple, but it's the single most integral piece of why this team works in the first place. Heathcliff and Outis are given that gimmick as well, of course. But that one mechanic is not foolproof. Relying on counters opens you up to being staggered for free. It's also hard to sustain this playstyle without letting your units die, and once the weakest link breaks, so does the whole chain. Additionally, the team's constant need for 6 copies of the same resource makes it exceedingly difficult to fuel ego skills. On the offensive side, a counter-based team composition simply can't capitalize on stagger turns, as their damage output is tied to getting hit. They also struggle with SP that you would normally get from clashing. And even if you do make it work, the payoff is not bigger than that of other teams. All of these facts about the Envy team were true, and they held it back for a while. Until these two happened. I've dubbed Outis and Heathcliff the sword and the shield of the middle, as the two of them focus on patching up the team's weaknesses. Heathcliff helps with the defensive side, while Outis bolsters the offense. How exactly do they do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's time for us to look at them, and we'll go in chronological order, starting with Heathcliff. The middle big brother, or Ricardo Heathcliff, is a sort of team leader identity for the middle. His passives target his middle allies, and these passives are what makes him the shield. More specifically, Heathcliff's second passive, Vengeance to 2 Resonance, is the big one. It makes middle allies take 20% less damage when using their counters. And as long as you have 6+ Envy Resonance, the entire team becomes unstaggerable to damage as long as they're using their counters. This eliminates 2 negative points of this team on its defensive side, as between the shields that more modern middles get and the damage reduction and stagger protection of Heathcliff, you get a lot more uptime on a team that, at first glance, might seem suicidal. He also provides his underlings with SP healing when he uses his counter, fixing a core issue of SP generation on the enemy team. Sure, he doesn't let them get to 45 off rip, but a 10 SP buff to 3 allies every single turn is quite a big deal when compared to the usual 0. This, however, isn't all Heathcliff does. Sure, the defensive buffs are a huge selling point, but he also has kicking, a rest skill 1 that he gets to use for free every turn. This is a huge deal, as 1 free point of wrath every turn opens up the possibility of fueling Electric Screaming Merceau without ever taking off turns. That skill is a pretty big deal, and we'll evaluate its impact a bit later. But getting access to a skill that costs more than just envy is a pretty big accomplishment on Heathcliff's part. Additionally, while he is the shield, Ricardo Cliff has some nice offensive advantages as well. Namely, he's the only middle identity with access to AoE, making him an extremely effective group combatant in a team that is usually centered around boss combat. He also has access to a skill 3-2 that he gets with tattoo stacks. Another big AoE nuke that doesn't require Heathcliff to counter to be used. This skill is another offensive breakthrough, as it can be actually used into stagger to great effect. Another toy for Heathcliff is his base ego, Body Sack. It's cheap and it's envy, but the biggest deal here is the haste. While boosted by this ego, Heathcliff can unleash his nuke on a group of enemies before they even get to move, eliminating the most dangerous of threats with utmost efficiency. If you haven't caught on yet, I'm talking specifically about Phase 2 of Refraction Railway 6 Section 2. Heathcliff can outspeed Hong Liu with the Body Sack haste, and then hit him with complete and total extermination to stop his strategy early. Additionally, Heathcliff gets a decently strong skill 2 with high clashing thanks to offense level buffs. It allows him to take clashes against strong skills without a large damage loss. And that too is defensive value in a sense. Overall, Heathcliff is a high tier unit that patches up the biggest holes of the Envy Resonance composition. But to live up to Season 7 standards, the team still lacked the X Factor, something that would make all of this consistent gimmick activation worth it on the big stage. And this is where we turn to our sword, the Middle Nursefather or Matthias Outis. Outis shares the usual gimmick of her faction, but as a Nursefather, she has to have a humongous nuke later in the fight. This part is implemented via her sword and its many seals. Outis begins the fight with sealed sword, and she goes through first seal removed and second seal removed to finally get her Leviathan. Once her sword has been unpacked, Outis's entire skill set changes, and her already pretty strong skills become utterly ridiculous. Complete and total extermination is obviously the biggest player here, as this skill, when used as a counter, has damage in the low 600s. If you know anything about damage numbers in Limbus, you'd know that Furioso, the strongest skill in the game, has damage in the mid 600s, and that skill has a refractory period of 2 to 3 turns. CATE can be used on every single turn after fully unpacking, which makes Outis absolutely gap every other unit in terms of physical damage, as long as the Middle Nursefather is surrounded by her perfect team. Gut Stab, her skill 2, is also another winner here, dealing damage higher than that of many skill 3s while being a skill 2. The biggest thing, however, is the fact that Outis breaks the stagger that turn curse completely, as her skill 3-2 returns to her hand when she gets to 15 grudge stacks, allowing you to strike enemies with the insanely strong skill without the need to counter more than once per rotation. This insane, unstoppable cascade of damage is the X factor that the team needed, and this is Envy's ticket to relevance. But first, you need to unlock Outis' sword. To do so, you need to make her use time to unpack a total of 3 times, which happens whenever her Rising Fever stack drops to 0. You lose Rising Fever by using Outis' skill 3 and getting 6 Envy Resonance, and you can only lose 1 per turn. With a total of 5 stacks across 3 phases, you'd think that the alternate skill set is only available on turn 6. But that is not true. What I didn't tell you is that whenever Outis falls below 80% HP with her sword still sealed, she uses time to unpack for free, regardless of fever. By combining this with the 6 resonance conditional, you can unpack twice with sealed sword, essentially skipping first seal unlocked. But there's some nuance. First of all, if you use Outis' skill 3 on the first turn, it will trigger time to unpack at skill end. If the skill 3 goes through without Outis getting staggered first, she will get first seal removed and will no longer be eligible for the free unpack. Instead, you should proc 6 resonance with her skill 2, and then you need Outis to get hit with something strong. The 80% HP threshold is very close to Outis' natural 75% HP stagger threshold, so usually you just let her get staggered here. Then, after she unstaggers at turn end, Outis will use 2 unpacks at the start of turn 2, which will immediately give you second seal removed and replenish your fever stacks, one of which can be lost on the same turn. Repeat the stack loss on turn 3 and, just like that, you have access to the Fire Sword of Legends as early as turn 4, which makes for a pretty fast setup time. This tech is always worth it, and you should remember it and try going for it whenever it is possible. The double unpack and the ridiculous damage numbers are really the main things I wanted to tell you about, but Outis has a bit more to her. First of all, when deployed alongside her apprentice, which you will be doing, Outis applies buffs to both herself and Ishmael for some extra damage. She also has a special Book of Vengeance effect, which lets her and Ishmael heal SP when targeting the unit that dealt the most damage to Outis, and get more grudge stacks as well, which makes for some nice synergy. Also, in addition to her skill 3-1, skill 3-2 and skill 3-3, Outis has a skill 3-4. But we won't talk about that, because the middle never give up their own. Heh, who am I kidding? We all know how great brothers and sisters see their underlings. They don't fucking care. Good girl, your sacrifice for the family won't be forgotten. It's a weird skill. It is activated when an ally with less than 20% HP or Middle Ishmael with less than 30% HP loses a clash to an enemy. When that happens, Outis butts in and uses her skill 3-4 against the enemy, but she also targets the ally that lost the clash as a sub-target. This usually leads to said ally dying, as well as some damage on the enemy. The fun thing here is that this actually stops the enemy skill from going through, in the same way as LCE Faust's skill 3-2 can erase enemy red coins. But it's really more of a last resort than a strategy you should be planning for. With this, we have completely understood the sword and the shield of the middle, and now we're ready to get acquainted with the rest of the team, which should be pretty simple. Middle Apprentice Ishmael and Middle Little Brother Sinclair are the next 2 strongest identities in the faction, and they used to be the team's win conditions until the 2 leaders came around. Their skill 3s do respectable damage, and they do even more as counters. Wait, back up a moment, why does this happen? Well, as you might know, in Limbus company, offense levels impact the clashing of your skills. When one skill has a higher offense level than another, it gets 1 clash power for every 3 offense level difference between the 2 skills. When a counter is in play, however, this mechanic transforms, and instead, only the counter can gain power here, and it gets final power instead of clash power, allowing it to hit back much harder. This is why your counters are so strong, and it's also why using a skill normally and using it as a counter can have a big difference. Anyways, you round out your team with the remaining 2 middles, the ones from Season 3. While the first 4 units are obvious, these guys might raise some eyebrows, so let me explain. Merceau is here for the obvious middle synergies, but he's also here for electric screaming. Heathcliff's Free Wrath enables this ego to be spammed, and it gives allies 2 envy damage up, while also passively providing 2 offense and defense level up to adjacent allies. Limbus content creator Asgo rejected this ego when its viability was brought up to him, and I am here to prove to you that it is decently powerful. To do so, we will take the damage values of your other unit's skills, and then we will give all of them a 20% dynamic damage modifier. Note that this does not mean we multiply them by 1.2, but instead it's a modification to part of their calculations. After having done that, we get 2 sets of values, and by subtracting one from the other, we get the impact that Merceau had on each skill. Add all of that and throw the damage of the ego on top of it, and this is how much one electric screaming contributes, even before accounting for the passive offense level. Of course, this is a highball calculation, as I took the strongest skills of each identity at max ramp. But even if you reduce these values, the damage that Merceau provides will still be on par with the damage of Middle Dawn, often outpacing her if she did not get a lot of envy damage up from her passive. While Electric Screaming gives Merceau his offense, he also has intrinsic support value, as he is one of the few sources of SP healing on the Envy Resonance team, allowing Merceau's passive to support his allies while also topping up his own sanity to let him use Electric Screaming more often. Being tied to an ego instead of a counter also allows Merceau to take dangerous clashes, which can alleviate the damage that his team takes while not reducing your outgoing damage. As for the Dawn slot, you have 2 options: Middle Dawn and Queen of Hatred Dawn. Middle is the prototype identity that all the others were built upon, so she's got nothing unique about her, really. She does get consistent damage with counters, and she's consistently weaker than all the newer identities, but she's still serviceable in a full team. Queen of Hatred, on the other hand, is the lone charge survivor in Envy, and she can use half of her kit to deal damage without breaking resonance, while her unique ego and clash guard make sure she doesn't break resonance with her skill 1. QOH Dawn scales through the fight, and she can output good damage with her skills 3 and 3 too, especially into stagger, as she doesn't play around counters. However, Middle is still generally preferred against bosses. Sure, Queen has a higher burst, but she can't hold a candle to consistent skill 3s as counters every turn, and she needs to scale, meaning she's far behind at the beginning of the fight anyways. I find Queen to still be usable against AoE content, as her skill 3-2 can hit up to 3 enemies, and smaller foes tend to get staggered quickly, which makes counter-based gameplay a lot weaker. But for the most part, I recommend sticking to running full Middle. This leaves us with 1 slot, and we're totally out of Middle identities. Who will take up slot 7? Well, if the fight does not demand it to be filled, you can double slot Outis, and that will actually let you use her skill 3-2 as early as turn 3. But what about content that forces a full team? Well, luckily, Season 7 has introduced a brand new Gregor identity, perfect for Envy Resonance. He might not be the best damage dealer, but he has utility that the team loves. And that identity is Lamp. What, did you think I'd say ADD? Nah, no way. That guy will end up spamming defense all day, and his charge sting doesn't even work on non-charge allies, so he's not very good here. Lamp, on the other hand, is actually a great unit to pair up with Envy. While he has no Envy skills of his own, Lamp Gregor has the gimmick of being really slow, to a point where he consistently gets outsped by all 6 of his allies. This lets you get 6 absolute resonance like usual, and Gregor is simply off to the side doing his thing. And his thing is actually burn infliction and utilization. See, the 3 newest middle units are all burn, so the addition of Lamp lets you give them their conditionals a bit earlier, and they, in turn, help him get his. It's a small synergy, but it's something. Also, Gregor generates resources that aren't Envy, while again, not breaking resonance, which is very valuable, especially in stuff like railways, where using middle for a section leaves the next section dry on good resources. And, on top of all that, Gregor has an ego called Garden of Thorns. It's a funny little WoW skill that gives your entire team more power and damage based on resonance, and it can be used to great effect in the niche of buffing your middles. There's a small caveat, however, and that is the fact that it needs 2 of each ego resource. Of course, this is borderline unfuelable without outside help. Luckily for us, we do have outside help in a lot of encounters. The Ricardo Reflect trial straight up just gives us what we need at the start of the fight, so one use is free there. Refraction Railway 6 is made up of a couple sections, and you can set up resources for future sections in earlier ones. Additionally, Section 2's boss has a mechanic that can award you with resources when you interact with it. And let's just say that Outis and her randomly targeted unpacks love interacting with that mechanic. Many story bosses also give you bonus resources, but Garden of Thorns is usually too heavy for those to fuel. Overall, this button is basically Electric Screaming Merceau on steroids, as it can provide a stronger buff for double the uptime. It also heals your allies, letting them fight for longer, and it's generally a button that you get to press only a handful of times, but when you time it right, it's a very big deal. In terms of alternatives to either Merceau or Gregor, you can look into Faust as well. Her Hex Nail is another good tool for team-wide envy damage buffs, but there are a couple issues. First of all, the ego is only good when overclocked, as it provides 3 envy fragility then, instead of the usual 1. However, overclocking increases the sanity cost of the skill, and it also makes it randomly choose its target. Against one boss it's no big deal, but as soon as it grows more than one part, you best believe that Hexnail is going to fuck up eventually. And also, Faust, who will most likely be set to multi-crack for her Envy Guard, won't get the SP healing from Middle Merceau and Heathcliff, meaning the 30 SP cost ego without guaranteed clashing will start eating into Faust's SP at a slightly alarming rate. Outside of her, there aren't many other good alternatives for Envy Resonance. You can look into units with Envy defense skills just to save the 6 ARES, but those are nothing more than stopgap solutions, and you will eventually need to upgrade to the team I showed here today. One last thing. In the Name of Love and Hate is a good AoE ego even on Middle Dawn, and you should use it to clear out waves. With this, we're done with the Middle and Envy Resonance. This team has risen through the ranks in the time of its existence, going from a meme team to a genuinely powerful comp, and it's a fun sight to see. What does the future hold for Envy though? I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure if I want this archetype to continue getting long-term support, as while it is fun to spam counters for a bit, it will definitely get boring quickly. But what do you guys think? If you disagree or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment below, and I might read it and respond. If you liked this video at any point, leave a like to let me know, and if you want to see more like this, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!